What's going on, guys? I hope all is well with you. I hope you had a great day. I hope you're having a great day. I hope you're blessed. You, your whole household, your family, your children, everybody. And we have a good study today. We'll be in Genesis chapter 13. We may get into 14, but we're going to start in Genesis chapter 13. Lessons in the book of Genesis. Lessons in the book of Genesis. So let's start in Genesis 13. And we'll start with verse 4. We'll just be looking at a few verses through here. But in verse 4, it says, unto the place of the altar which he had made there at the first, and there Abram called on the name of Yah. So his name isn't changed to Abraham yet, but we see Abraham, well, in verse 1, Abraham, he went out of Egypt with him and his wife and Lot. He was a rich man. And he journeyed from the south even to Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hay. And then in verse 4, as I said, it says, unto the place of the altar which he had made there at the first, and there Abram called on the name of Yah. I just wanted to bring out that verse. That first verse is that he called on the name of Yah here in verse 4. And this is the type of man that Abraham is. We'll see this a lot. And in the end of this chapter, in verse 18, it says, then Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto Yah, or unto the Lord. So when you look at an altar, when we look at an altar, these are the things that an altar is for: worship, devotion, covenant, commitment, consecration, or sacrifice. So whenever we see altars within the scriptures, it is always going to be connected with worship, devotion, covenant, commitment, consecration, or sacrifice. So this is the type of man Abraham is. This is the type of man we will see that he is. If you haven't, I'm sure if you've already read in Genesis, we're just going over a few things. It's many lessons, and these things we're going to see also in the New Testament. But Abraham is this type of man. He's a man of worship. He's a man of devotion. He is a man of sacrifice. He makes one of the biggest sacrifices, which we will look at. One of the biggest things, one of the biggest tests that's in the scriptures, is what Abraham goes through. But the altar is also for sacrifice. Sacrifices are made at an altar, which kind of touches on consecration as well. And with that being said, let's look at a verse in Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. Let's look at a verse in Romans chapter 12. Romans 12, verse 1. I'm pretty sure you've heard this verse before. Romans 12, verse 1, it says, I beseech thee, or I beseech you, which is basically to strongly urge. He says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren or brothers, by the mercy of Elohim, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto Elohim, which is your reasonable service. So it says, but when we present our bodies a living sacrifice, it is our reasonable service. And when you look at that word service in the Greek, in this verse right here, the word service means worship. Okay, so service means worship in this actual verse in Romans 12, verse 1. And it's connected to being a living sacrifice. So we see that we can still do these same things, and we can still make sacrifices. It says this in the book of Hebrews, that we can make sacrifices to Yah by giving him thanks and giving him praise. That's like a sacrifice of our lips. Okay, we can sacrifice to one another. We can sacrifice our goods, our food, our water, our clothes, our time. We can do these same sacrifices to one another in the body today. So this is the type of man that Abraham was. Wherever he went, he brought the altar with him, or he erected an altar, or it says he called on the name of Yah. If we see that in Genesis chapter 13, verse 4. Abram called on the name of Yah. Genesis 13, verse 18, the last verse in that chapter. It says, then Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto Yah. And it's all throughout these things about Abraham. He always built an altar wherever he went because he was that type of man. A man of covenant, a man of consecration, a man of sacrifice. He was a willing sacrifice, and Yah was first in his life. And he was a rich man, but his riches did not have him. If we look at Genesis chapter 13, verse 2, it says, and Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. Job was this way. David was a rich man. These were rich men, but their riches did not have them. They were consecrated to Yah. They were Yah's servants. Okay? What is another thing that we can look at about this altar being erected or calling on Yah's name, with it being connected with commitment, covenant, sacrifice, and worship? What does the Messiah say? If we want to get closer to him, or how to be close to him, or how to find actually your purpose for life, or your fulfillment in life, in Matthew chapter 10, it says, starting at Matthew chapter 10, verse 38 through 39, it says, and he that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. So we see here that Yeshua is saying when we lose our lives, that is when we find it. That calls for a sacrifice. And the more we see him, the more it will be our desire to give up our lives to him, because he is good, he is worth it. He is worthy of everything that we have to give him. Everything. He is literally worthy. He is worthy for all of it. And it's easy to give it up when you see him and when your eyes are beholding upon him. For what are we holding on to anyway? What are we holding on to anyway? When he has offered everything to us, he that saves his life will lose it. But he that finds his life, he that loses his life for my sake, he said, will find it. You will find it. And that's coming from that place of sacrifice. That place of sacrifice. So let's look at something else in Genesis chapter 13. We're going to look at Genesis chapter 13, verse 7, 7 basically through 13, but we're gonna read just 7 through 8 right now, or 7 through 9. In Genesis 13, it says, and there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled there in the land. And Abram said unto Lot, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen. For we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. What can we see here? When Abraham says, let there be no strife between our herdmen in verse 8, and then he says, I pray thee, or I pray. He was praying and desiring greatly that there be no strife between their two herdmen. This is something that is, of course, all throughout the New Testament, but this is Abraham walking in the Spirit. What do I mean by this is Abraham walking in the Spirit before we even see that word walking in the Spirit? Because he says, I pray, let there be no strife between us, our herdmen, and your herdmen. Let there be no strife between us. Why? He said, because we are brethren, or we are brothers. We are brothers. We are brothers. He said, let there be no strife between us. What does the scripture say in the book of Galatians? Galatians chapter 5. Galatians chapter 5, verse 18 through 20. It says, but if ye be led of the Spirit, ye are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these, the works of the flesh: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies. So strife is in the list of these works of the flesh. So when Abraham is talking to the herdsmen of his herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen, and when he says, let there be no strife between us, I pray, let there be no strife between us. Why? Because we are brothers. We are brethren. Abraham was a peacemaker. You know, we see that application when the Messiah is teaching in the Beatitudes. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of Elohim. Blessed are the peacemakers. This is what Abraham was doing in Genesis chapter 13, verse 8, 7 through 8. And if we look at Matthew chapter 5 now, Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, it says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of Elohim. And this is exactly what Abraham was trying to do. He was walking in the spirit. He wasn't walking in strife. In Galatians 5:19, that's one of the works of the flesh. It is strife. He said, we be brethren. We be brethren. What are we doing? What are we doing? Why aren't we in unity? What does the scripture say in the book of Psalms? Because Yah loves unity. He loves unity. And we should love unity as well with one another. Psalm 133, verse 1. Psalm 133, verse 1 says, behold, how good and how pleasant is it for brethren to dwell together in unity. How good and how pleasant is it for brethren or brothers to dwell together in unity. This is what Abraham was seeking after. He was walking in the spirit. He was walking in the spirit, okay? He was a peacemaker. He was definitely a peacemaker. Let's look at 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 22. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 22. And what we're seeing, the foundation of the Torah or the law of Yah, we're only in Genesis 13, but we're seeing these same applications reiterated in the New Testament. He was definitely a peacemaker. He was walking in the spirit. He did not want strife between the brethren, because even as it says in the book of Psalm, how good and pleasant is it for brethren to dwell together in unity. Let's look at what Peter says right here. And this is interesting because this has to do with our souls being pure. Look at the context. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 22, it says, seeing you have purified your souls. Okay, so before we go any further, it says, seeing you have purified your soul, in obeying the truth through the Spirit unto unfeigned love of the brethren. See that you love one another with a pure heart fervently. So it says right here, seeing we have purified our souls by what? Obeying the truth, which is Yah's word, keeping Yah's commandments. Thy law is truth. The scripture says thy word is truth. So we purify our souls, 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 22, by obeying the truth through the Spirit. And it says unto, or which leads to, unfeigned love of the brethren, or love for the brothers that's not fake, real love for the brethren. So by walking in the truth through the Spirit and love to the brethren is what purifies our soul in the sight of Yah. 1 Peter 1, verse 22, and we see this in Abraham's life. We see this, the purification of the soul, walking in the truth, obedience to the truth through the Spirit, it says, and unto unfeigned love of the brethren, or leading to unfeigned love of the brethren. All right. So we see that in Genesis chapter 13, verse 7 and 8. We see that Abraham was walking in the Spirit. He was a peacemaker. He was desiring unity, because this is the desire in the heart of Yah. And this is what it looks like when Yah's Spirit is within a man. If we look at verse 9, it says, "Is not," we're back in Genesis 13 now. Verse 9, it says, "Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left, then I will go to the right. And if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left." Just very simply in verse 9, we see humility. Abraham being the elder, speaking to Lot, he's giving Lot the decision to go whichever way he wants to go. Okay, and Abraham is just like, whatever way you don't go, basically, I'm gonna go. So I'm gonna let you choose first. So that's very humble for Abraham to do. So now we're gonna read 10 through 13. And it says, "And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere before Yah, destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of Yah, like the land of Egypt, as thou camest unto Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, the promised land, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent toward Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before Yah exceedingly. All right. What do we see right here? 10 through 13. So Lot lifted up his eyes, and he beheld the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere before Yah destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of Yah. So Lot looks at this place toward Jordan. He looks toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and he looks and he sees how plush and how beautiful it is, and he chooses it because of his sight. Okay, he chooses it because of his sight. One thing I liked and I loved about David is when David was walking with Yah, when we see like in the book of Samuel, it always says that David inquired of Yah. He sought counsel from Yah. He desired to know which way he would go. And even in the book of Jeremiah chapter 10, it says, it is not in man that walks to direct his way. I'm going to say it again, Jeremiah 10, verse 23. It is not in man who walks to direct his way. And right here we see that Lot was looking the lust of the eyes. He saw the plain of Jordan. He saw the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. It's plush, it has resources. Before Yah destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of Yah, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. So this is a plush place, and Lot did not choose this. He chose it because of how it looked and the benefit that would have been there. But in verse 13 it says, but the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before Yah exceedingly. And we know the scripture says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, be not deceived. Evil communications corrupt good manners. I'm not sure if Lot knew how the people was there or not. Of course, there's a great chance that he could have knew how it was, but because of the benefit of the place, he chose this place. But that's not always the place that we should choose, because it looks good. Because it looks good, we need to inquire of Yah, because it can look great, but the Father could have something different from us, because it can corrupt our characters. Being around these type of people who don't follow Yah and who are in idolatry or whatever the case it may be. Let's look at some other scriptures and what I'm explaining. In Psalm chapter 106. Psalm chapter 106 now. We're in Psalm chapter 106 right now. I think we're going to start in verse 33. In Psalm 106. Psalm 106. No, Psalm 106 starting at verse 34. It says, they did not destroy the nations concerning whom Yah commanded them, but were mingled among the heathen and learned their works, and they served their idols, which were a snare unto them. So it says right here that Israel did not destroy the nations which Yah told them to, but they were mingled among the heathen, and they learned their works, or they learned their ways, because they were mingled with them. And they served their idols, which was a snare to them. A snare is a trap, okay? And they learned their ways of these people that they were around. Just as it says in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33. 1 Corinthians 15, 33. Be not deceived, evil communications corrupt good manners. Okay? So, and this is not to say, the scriptures does say Lot was a righteous man, but we always have to be careful by choosing a place just because it looks good. When the scripture says in Genesis 13, verse 13, that the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before Yah exceedingly. So it was a greatly wicked place, and I'm sure Yah did not want him to be there. But his choice was not by wisdom, it was by desire. Desire, not a good desire. Not a good desire. So in verse 13, when it says, but the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before Yah exceedingly, what does that mean for a man or a woman to be wicked and a sinner before Yah exceedingly? This is somebody, when you look at the word sinner or sinners, it's somebody who is devoted to sin. They are a worker of iniquity, or this is something that they do. They practice this. It's like a trade. It's something that they do. And it says, and when he says they were like this exceedingly, we know Yah is very merciful, very, very merciful. Not even just to go into, well, I don't even have to go that way. We can look at Genesis when he destroyed the earth in with a flood. It says that it grieved him at his heart to destroy the earth with a flood, and it took him 100+ years to do so. Okay, so Yah is very merciful, but he is very righteous, and he's gonna always uphold his righteousness, always, and his holiness or his set apartness. So what does it mean when it says in Genesis 13 that they were wicked before Yah exceedingly? Let's look at 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 6. It says, and he made his son pass through the fire and observed times and used enchantments and dealt with familiar spirits and wizards. He wrought much wickedness in the sight of Yah to provoke him to anger. Okay, it says right here that he worked great wickedness in the sight of Yah. That's what it means when it said in Genesis 13:13 that they were wicked and sinners before Yah. They was wicked and sinners in the sight of Yah, because we know he sees and he knows all things. He sees and he knows all things. All right. So when we look at that, that's what that means when it says before Yah, or if something is before him, it's because it's within his sight. It's because it's within his sight. All right. So we see Abraham was a merciful man. He was a peacemaker. He said, let there be no strife between us. Abraham was walking in the spirit, as it were. He was a peacemaker. He desired unity. 1 Peter 1, verse 22, that we purify our souls in obeying the truth, leading to or unto unfeigned love for the brethren, or love that's not diluted for the brethren. This purifies our soul. And this is what Abraham had. He did not want strife between him and his brethren, but he wanted unity. And we see, as we just went through 10 through 13, looking at Lot lifted up his eyes and behold, or he saw the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. It was a plush land, and he chose it because of how it looked. But it's always good to inquire of Yah to see what he thinks about it, because we go off of our own understanding. Yah sees the future. He knows all things. So we can make a wrong move by going off of our instinct without being led by the Father. Because as we know, Lot is going to be, of course, captured. He's going to be kidnapped. He is going to be kidnapped when he goes here. When he goes here. All right? And another thing that's beautiful is Abraham already had the promise that everything was going to be his. If we look at Genesis chapter 13, verse 14, it says, and Yah said unto Abraham, or to Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now your eyes and look from the place where thou art, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which thou seest, or for all the land which you see, to thee or to you will I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it, and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. So praise Yah. Then he says, then Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto Yah. So Yah had already gave Abraham the promise, all of this is going to be yours, which is beautiful. Even with what Abraham said in verse 9, is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If you go to the left hand, then I will go to the right. If you depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. Everything was already promised to Abraham. The land was already promised to him. So he was content with the promise. He waited on the promise. He waited on the promise. He didn't go out after the flesh or what he would desire, but he went after what Yah had already promised him, and what the promise was, trusting in the Father. So these are just some good lessons right here in Genesis 13. And I pray this short study blessed you. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or rest of your night, wherever you are. Shalom.